it was a year to get to that report, and I don't think I needed a full year to come to some of the same conclusions that were highlighted in that report. I think one of the things for a lot of us that say we need more accountability, we can feel kind of gaslit sometimes, as though like there aren't these really foundational problems in our system of policing. The report at least gives us the outside validation that like, hey, what we actually saw is real and it is a problem and we really need to address it.
We're rolling.
Calling all cat people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Tell us who your horse is.
This is Mr. Miyagi. The foster parents named him that. Kind of the wrong, probably a bit problematic name. He's a Chinese hairless crested. It has nothing to do with Japan, but he had a pretty long beard when he was a puppy, and so the foster parents named him Mr. Miyagi.
Okay. This is adorable. How's the personality? What's Mr. Miyagi's personality?
He is a Velcro dog that just loves to cuddle with people, and he likes to ravenously attack other dogs.
Oh, one of those.
Yeah.
Small dogs are vicious.
But only with other dogs.
Tell me about your home office setup, because I've been curious watching council meetings, and when you first appeared on the podcast, you have a really nice camera. Your audio is great. You are very well put together. Why is that? Do you have a podcast? Are you a Twitch streamer? What do you do?
Back before I ran for council, I had my own consulting practice, and I would work a lot with small businesses and nonprofits. And very frequently, when you're trying to do any web design project or strategy project, you don't have the resources to hire out like this super comprehensive like production team. So I started just like adding a few tools to my toolbox, so that if I need to go do a photography thing or I need to record something, I have something that kind of steps it up a little bit. But it mostly, I use it on a few clients, but mostly it's been very helpful running for city council in the middle of a pandemic. That's completely happening over Zoom.
Yeah. Because there are some council members where they'll be like looking down at a weird angle during meetings. Like, well, the news might run this on the news.
Right. Yeah.
And if your audio is not crystal clear, maybe they won't carry your very persuasive argument on the news.
Right. You don't want to get dinged on blurry cameras when it comes to how you come off in the news.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're doing a great job. You look good. Are you stressed out that you're already running for re-election 2023? Like, you just took office and you need to have your campaign theme ready for 2023.
I originally was like, oh my God, this is going to be so exhausting. But I think what's actually nice being a first termer is I don't know any better. I don't know the luxury of a 4-year term, so I just have to stay kind of in that mode. And I'm not out door knocking every night, but it just kind of keeps you kind of like present in the community in a way that I think is actually a good thing. So,
do you have a campaign theme for 2023? Tell me what you're going to be bragging about, what you will haven't had time to accomplish yet, but what you already have to have in mind to be bragging about in 23.
Yeah. So one of the things that's kind of been interesting, where you caught me at a good time. This is Ward Week. Maybe this is your entire master plan, is to catch all the council members while we're out in community. But there's a whole spectrum of policies that I have on my agenda this term, and it's everything from probably the biggest issue around public safety all the way through to working on setbacks, because if you want to retrofit your home to make it either, passive house compliant or like thicker facade so that you can have a stronger insulation, you have to go through the same process as though you were expanding, doing a kitchen renovation and doing a bump out. You have to go through the whole planning process all the same. And it's kind of like a very nerdy local municipal government thing, but I'm actually really excited about it because it feels like this very tangible, attainable thing when it comes to climate action. Most climate action things feel so like large and global, and how are we ever going to convert every car on the road to electric, or decommission every single coal power plant and convert it into something that's more renewable. Whereas I feel like looking at the code of ordinances and addressing the specifics around the setbacks feels like something that can be done in a 2-year term. So that's kind of the range of things I'm working on.
Okay, I messed up by not introducing the show or you or
you can
myself.
just splice that.
I can. I'll try to make it not awkward. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards, and my guest is Ward 1 Council Member Elliott Payne, also Vice Chair of the Public Safety Committee. And so today we had the announcement there are no charges for the officer who killed Amir Locke. I remember a couple of weeks ago at the presentation for the after action report for MPD's actions after George Floyd was murdered, you said something to the effect of, I'm having the same feeling now as a council member that I had back in 2020 before I had been elected. And just as an indication of maybe we haven't made the progress we hoped that we would have made. The mayor campaigned on banning no-knock warrants in 21, turned out not to be the case. And that's like a dangerous tactic. We should have known better as a city, as a mayor, as a chief, to get that policy right before it went bad and got someone killed. And so I wonder, do you have faith in the policy development process of the mayor? I remember Councilmember Ellison talking about this at one of those meetings. I think he asked the mayor directly, what is your process? How do we get this right? Do you have confidence in the mayor? Should we have confidence that the mayor is finally getting this right after 4 years of getting it wrong?
I think faith and confidence are maybe not the frame that I approach this work under. I'm looking at it. So first I'll rewind and just say it's devastating to hear this news, right? We're always grasping at something has to have changed, something has to improve. We must have gone through this ordeal for a reason. And it's deeply unsatisfying to watch another Black man get killed and to have that feeling of powerlessness or that feeling of when is this going to change? At what point is this going to change? And for me, when I think about this, it's kind of less a faith question or a confidence question around any particular colleague that I have to make policy with. And it's more, I kind of look inward and ask myself, what can I do? How can I respond to this moment? I actually fell apart the day, and it was a really weird day, the day that Amir Locke was killed. We were going through a staffing study that, an outside consultant was hired to produce the staffing study to do a fairly deep analysis around how many calls for service is the department getting per year, how many police officers would we need to meet the call for service demand. I'm going to put my dog down over here because he's getting jumpy. That was juxtaposed with the news that Amir Locke had been killed. And I don't know if you remember, that day was just, it was a blur. The original individual named on the warrant wasn't the victim. Amir Locke wasn't related to the warrant. There just wasn't a lot of clarity around what had happened. And I think the thing that I had reflected on in that time was the fact that I was learning about the information as though I was just any other citizen in the city. And I had this thought that, being on this kind of exclusive body would give you some sort of exclusive access to information. And that really, wasn't the case. We did get a briefing, maybe, I can't remember if it was the evening of the shooting, or I think it was actually the next day, because I remembered having some very forceful words about releasing the body camera as city staff was kind of giving us the lay of the land. They're, trying to, reinforce that we really want to only speak when we know facts, and we don't want to feed speculation. We don't want to feed rumors. And so what I knew that day was that Amir Locke died at the hands of the police. And that's about all that I knew. And so here we are, fast forwarding to today. And remember, that was like less than a month within the term starting. And so we were still figuring out like how to arrange our office furniture and like what days our committees are meeting as this was unfolding. And it's just, speaking as a Black man, it's devastating to see this. And it's devastating to see it when an event like this is what drove you to run for council. And the effort that it took to run for council was pretty enormous, especially when you're running as a first-time person who doesn't have a strong background in political organizing. I didn't have a strong background in movement work. I was just a person living my life who happened to work in City Hall at the time and happened to have some familiarity with how City Hall functions, and thought that it would be a good idea to step up in this moment. And to arrive and in your first month have the thing that you ran to try to stop happen right in front of you, and to feel powerless all over again. So I actually fell apart. And it took me a solid 24 hours to kind of get my feet under myself and kind of go, wait a minute. I did run for a reason. I do have power. Let me open up this legislative process book and see what are the procedures that I need to do to pursue a path forward. And we came into City Hall over the weekend and, spent hours combing through the charter language, combing through the legislative process. And then that's when we decided, let's announce an initiative to amend the charter via ordinance. And so going via that process means I would like to try to do this without relitigating the election that we just finished. This path I wanted to pursue, keeping the police department, but building a new model of public safety, acknowledging the lessons that we learned from the last election, that, as many people had fought with so much passion to support the ballot question around creating a Department of Public Safety and eliminating the police, we didn't win that debate. And it was as engaged a voter base as maybe the city's ever seen. And we did not win that question. And so with some humility, I wanted to move forward and say, let's acknowledge that the majority of the residents of Minneapolis want to preserve the police department as an institution, but a huge, almost unprecedented number of people voted for something new. I think we should still build that new model and build it alongside a police department. And so that's when I announced my intention of pursuing this via ordinance, so that we don't have to revisit the ballot. If I can have robust conversations with all of my colleagues on council and with the mayor, and we can get to a sense of agreement via a consensus process, it is possible to create this department. The devil's in the details, and that's exactly the work that I've been working on over the last few weeks.
So you've been very, very clear. I think you've used the word, this is not a rehash of last year's election debate over Department of Public Safety. So I assume that means authority structures, as far as the mayor's in charge, that's not really in question.
Right.
When it comes to your public safety charter amendment. Also, MPD. So I'm trying to figure out like what would it be then? Would it simply be having the city's various public safety divisions and departments underneath one department head? Is that basically a way to coordinate all these activities? Is that the basic argument?
Yeah, that's the vision. So before we even engaged in this debate, when I was working at the city as a contractor, our team was already in full swing working on alternative responses to police. And so out of that work came a set of recommendations around creating a mental health team, of which that is now launched and live and responding to 911 calls that have to do with the technical term is emotionally disturbed person. That's a code that is indicating who should be dispatched. So we're already dispatching the mental health response based on some of that work that started in earnest in like either 2018 or 2019. So long before the current era of this conversation around public safety. We also shifted some resources. The crime prevention specialists were in the police department. We shifted them to the neighborhood and community relations department, which already did a lot of work around neighborhoods and having a deeper connection with communities. So it was an acknowledgement that we should have a deeper connection into community with our public safety responses. We have the Office of Violence Prevention, which is in the health department. We have an opiate task force in the health department. We have a homeless response team in the health department that actually spans work across a number of departments, and it's actually the boundaries of their work is expansive enough that they're figuring out where they belong. And I think there would be a very clarifying path for us to have all these different programs and teams and initiatives under one roof, one manager, one point of accountability. And I think that's what I'm actually very encouraged by, is the shift of this conversation has gone from, should we have a comprehensive approach to public safety, to, I announced my intention for a Department of Public Safety. The mayor announced his government reorganization with the Office of Community Safety. And now the dimension of this discussion for me is really, how do we create more transparency and accountability in all of our public safety responses at the city?
Do you think the mayor's proposed Office of Community Safety is in conflict with, are there differences there? Do you think there's some tension?
There is.
In what you want and what he wants?
There is some tension, but I think that tension already lived within the ongoing negotiations and, discussions I was having with my colleagues on council, because we have everything from the perspective that what we need right now is a new model of public safety, a new response model that isn't based on, a military model, which is, the police force is based on a military response. So that's a new model that doesn't exist right now within our city, that has the elements of it spread throughout the city, but let's actually resource this new model, bring all those different elements together so that we have a holistic response and give it the room to grow. That's one perspective. Another perspective is the police have been operating on an island. They have they're almost their own power structures and reporting mechanisms that are, completely separate from the rest of how government is managed day to day. And we need to close that gap and bring the police department together. And so that's very much where the mayor's proposal lands, is that we need to integrate the police with a holistic response. I believe really strongly that we need to make space to grow a new model. And I don't think that these are their intention on first glance, but I believe that if we were to be very intentional about moving forward and how we're going to implement this, it could look something like a phased approach of, first we have to define what are the requirements that we would like to see in the leader of this new initiative. Do they have a civilian background or do they have a police background? I would be advocating for somebody that has a civilian background, a public health approach to this work, something with that type of set of skills and experiences. We got to define what are the parameters around that role. We need to define what are the departments that really need to be consolidated and in what order, because as an example, some of the conversations have, actually the work of my team, we were looking to traffic control as a way of responding to, abandoned vehicles, which was historically handled by the police department. You have a car blocking your driveway or, an abandoned car out front. You would have, the police would come and ticket that and tow it if necessary. And we had shifted that to traffic control. Well, traffic control is inside of regulatory services, which is also the department that does, the inspections, or does your garage have any chipping paint or anything like that. And so it's one thing to, say 911, you are a fully functioning operational part of the city's safety response. We're just changing who the organizational chart of where this department reports. It's a whole nother thing to dig down into a division of a department and say, this should be a unique part of our public safety response, but the other inspection services might still stay. And so we need to be really intentional about how we bring these capabilities together. And I think that that would be true no matter which proposal we were leading with. The one that my vision was originally having a separate initiative and then integrating the police later. That was my vision. I think that even in all the police, every single response, all under one roof, that still is, I would suggest it would be very wise of us to be diligent and intentional about how we bring all these capabilities together.
So what is the difference between a new department and creating an office? Is the person who leads that office the equivalent of a department head? That's like a very technical question.
It is a very technical question, and it's actually a really important question because one of the things about the recommended government structure is that it's actually going to require a lot of edits to the charter to make it consistent with what we passed in question 1 in the last election. And so all of those departments, the city has kind of 2 main types of departments. You have charter departments and non-charter departments. Charter departments are capabilities and functions that are prescribed in the city's charter, our constitution. Other departments are not charter departments, but they are important enough to elevate to a department type of initiative. A lot of those departments live underneath the city coordinator. So one example of that is the sustainability. It's actually the Office of Sustainability. It's not named in the charter. We didn't put sustainability on the ballot for voters to vote on. There wasn't a unanimous council vote with the approval of the mayor to amend the charter to create an Office of Sustainability. They just created an Office of Sustainability because it's an important thing for our city to focus on. The Office of Violence Prevention was created via an ordinance. And so it went through the standard process of drafting an ordinance. You got to get 7 votes and approval by the mayor. That's how the Office of Violence Prevention was created. And there's a number of offices and departments that have been created over the years in the city that didn't require a charter change. But I believe that with how big the overhaul is that the mayor is proposing, there's going to be a need to do quite a few charter amendments. And I see that as somewhat of an opportunity because it's really shaping the dynamic of council, because there are no factions as such with this work, because whether it's public safety under my initiative or public safety under the mayor's initiative, that's actually a subset of this overall government structure work that I think is actually a bigger deal and a bigger lift than, consolidating some existing functions under one roof.
Let's talk about the police contract. But we've been talking about the police contract and the promise of the next police contract for a long time. Mm-hmm. Council campaigns have mentioned it as a thing. We have to fix the police contract. The mayor, right after George Floyd was murdered, was going on morning shows, national morning shows, talking about the police contract and how we have to fix it.
Yes, the elephant in the room is the police union, is the collective bargaining agreement.
And here we are in 2022, we finally have a new police contract. And like the headline change in it is that we will tell officers when their public personnel data has been requested and who requested it. That doesn't feel like a change for accountability. And I during the presentation from the city's chief labor negotiator, he explained how, well, it's actually preferable that we should want the chief and the mayor to set these discipline standards outside the contract. It gives us flexibility. And you seemed convinced by that. And I want to defer to someone's professional knowledge and experience that is correct and true. But at the same time, we've been told for so long that we should expect a big change in the police contract. Like, it's a very confusing situation. What is a normal person supposed to take from that? Should we have expected more from the police contract or not?
So what we're fundamentally kind of dancing around is, what will it take to hold the police accountable for their actions and behavior? And for many years, and this mayor is not the first mayor to say this, it's really hard to hold the police accountable for bad behavior if they're actually engaged in bad behavior, because they have so much protection from the union. They have so much protection from the union contract. That has been a narrative that has been shared for many administrations. This administration isn't the first. And I think that also, for many years, the politics of policing have been so fraught. It's a third rail. When crime rises, people really want to trust the police to handle that. And there are certain people in our community that are really well served by that model of policing. I live in Northeast. I live in Upper Northeast. So the second precinct covers Northeast, all the way down the river on the west side of the ward, and then down a little bit into South. The second precinct has the lowest calls for service in the entire city. The reality is I don't see a lot of police in my neighborhood because there's not as high a need for calls for service. There's not as much activity that requires patrols. There's not as many hot spots. And it's so sleepy on my side of the city that the moment a garage gets broken into, a lot of people, it's a very violating experience. And the neighborhood that I grew up in Milwaukee, I think my mom had something like 4 cars stolen, several break-ins. I don't remember. One of the break-ins, the person was still in the house when my mom came home from work. We just got used to sometimes your stuff gets stolen, which is an awful way to actually live your life. And it's only after I've moved off to college and established myself in this neighborhood that I'm like, wait a minute, you can just leave your house and not lock the door. I lock my door. This is going to be on the internet. I still lock my door.
Don't go to Elliott Payne's house, please.
Don't come to my house, please. Unless you're a friendly person to say hi, and I'll say hi. But it's the kind of place where if you forget to leave your garage door open, that can happen very frequently, and you just have a neighbor. I've closed my neighbor's garage because I've seen it open, because they were doing some yard work or something and just forgot to close the garage door. We don't have a lot of activity like that in our neighborhood. So when it does arrive, and it does happen in our neighborhood, and we have catalytic converters stolen in our neighborhood, historically people are just I just want more police. I just don't ever want this to happen to me. It's very violating for that to happen. And when something bad happens with police, it's kind of there's a lot of fear of losing police officers. The police officers feel very under the gun if too much heat comes down on them, and people just historically didn't want to bring all that heat and lose officers, right? But now we're in a different world with a different set of expectations around what kind of force we should have and what level of accountability and transparency that we want. And so this story of the police contract being we can't do anything, the union has our hands tied. I want to challenge that because the Federation operates with the same bargaining agreement that many other public sector unions operate under. The language is very similar. And, one of my constituents is a business agent for MAPE, the state union contract. And the example that he gave for me is it's not in the bargaining agreement. It's in their policies. And one of their policies is if you use a state-issued phone to harass anybody in any way, send explicit text messages, anything, you're fired. You need to pass the 7 tests of just cause, meaning you can't just fire anybody for any reason because you thought that they, talked to you wrong or looked at you wrong. You have to have clear policies. Those policies need to be executed equitably. Nobody gets special treatment. When a policy is broken, there needs to be a fair and thorough investigation. Employees should have the right to appeal whatever the outcome of that investigation, and on and on. That's kind of like the core tenet of labor protections, and the L in DFL is for labor. We are a party that supports labor. So the union contract for the Federation exists within that ecosystem and that framework. And one of the things that we actually need to dig into is, well, if we're not supposed to have the language for discipline in the contract, and our labor director made a very strong case for this. If you put language for discipline in the contract, if you need to update that, if you need to make it stronger, if you need to add more specificity and detail, you have to go through the exact same process that we went through right now to get to the agreement we have, which was a multi-year negotiation process that got stagnant and sat for a year or more before it got approved. And we want more flexibility and adaptability. And that's handled in the policy and procedure manual. It's handled in a discipline matrix that has, if you do X, the discipline needs to be Y, and it can be escalated to Z. There is an ecosystem of these documents. I don't have a background in labor relations, and I've had to very quickly gain some knowledge in that. And so one of the things that I think we need to see is a robust ecosystem of this accountability framework along with a contract. And that I voted no because on the union contract because I haven't seen that work. I've read the policy and procedure manual. It's hundreds of pages. Did I skip to the discipline section? Yes. And the discipline section isn't that robust. And I think it could be made stronger, and it could have some more clarity, and it could have more specificity around what kind of conduct do we want and what kind of conduct do we not want, and what should the consequences be for the conduct that we don't want. And I think that we need that set of documentation along with following through on actually holding people accountable down to the, throughout the chain of command. And actually one of the things that we saw with the after action report was a breakdown in the chain of command. So it needs to be a system of discipline and accountability. Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of things and this is not a question, this is a statement, but there was a lot of things in the after action report that, one, it feels like we're hearing the same things over and over again, just organized into a new report. Like, it's shocking and you're horrified by it, but it's like, I already knew this. And the other thing is just how poorly managed MPD is. I think the report kind of glossed over the actions of individual officers, but very damning in terms of like how mismanaged MPD is. And it was depressing to me, but I won't make you respond to that. Do you want to respond to that?
I'll agree with the sentiment that, it was a year to get to that report. And I don't think I needed a full year to come to some of the same conclusions that were highlighted in that report. But what it at least does is it gives us an inventory of issues that we really need to work through. And like, I think one of the things for a lot of us that say we need more accountability, we can feel kind of gaslit sometimes as though like there aren't these really foundational problems in our system of policing. The report at least gives us the outside validation that, like, hey, what we actually saw is real and it is a problem and we really need to address it.
We'll be right back after a brief message from our sponsor.
Wedge Live is sponsored by Dispatch. Reports from the Minneapolis and St. Paul arts and culture scene. Dispatch has recommendations for live music, film screenings, taproom parties, even local pro wrestling. Head to dispatchmsp.com to read interviews with the people who make our cities such a fun place to live and find chances to win tickets to upcoming shows. You can also learn where to find copies of Dispatch's print edition and sign up for their newsletter at dispatchmsp.com. That's dispatchmsp.com.
This ad worked because I've never heard of Dispatch until now, so...
It used to be called Secrets of the City. Do you remember that Twitter account?
Yeah, I remember them. They were around, like, a long time ago. But I didn't know
they're still around and known as dispatchmsp.com. That's dispatchmsp.com. Yeah. Did you see the Star Tribune article or column recently talking about a new standard for police arbitration cases in Minnesota?
I didn't.
And one of the arbitrators in her decision said something like, we hold police to a different standard. And they upheld the discipline. So I don't know. I would go. I recommend reading that. I thought it was interesting, and it kind of made me hopeful that maybe arbitration is changing for the better in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think again that's part of the whole system, right? It's not just the labor agreement; it's all the way down to who are the arbitrators and what are their backgrounds and what is their commitment to transforming the way we approach this work, and how are they selected, and do we have the right ones in that role?
Yeah, and I think one of the changes that was made was they're no longer letting both sides like veto who the arbitrator is. And that's extremely important because they try to game the system so they can get selected by like splitting, making compromises that maybe there shouldn't be a compromise. Maybe it's a very clear-cut case.
Literal language in the contract that involves a coin toss to strike, taking equal turns striking who gets to be on the list of arbitrators. It's a very kind of peculiar detail of the labor contract. But like I said, it's in the framework of a lot of bargaining agreements. And so, but like I said, we need to look at the entire ecosystem around this, not just one document.
Let's talk about police buyback. There was a case a couple of months ago. The Lowry Hill neighborhood, a group of people started an organization to buy police officers. I think they wanted to spend $200,000 to basically, police buyback is when you pay the city for police overtime. So you're paying for patrols as a private entity or organization. And you criticize that a little. It seems bad to me that a wealthy neighborhood can buy extra police protection. It just seems wrong to me as a public service. But then there was also a recent case of, I think it was either the Vikings or US Bank Stadium wanted to spend $1 million or so for, things that you need to put on a sporting event, like a SWAT team and bomb sniffing dogs, that kind of thing. And I will admit, Lisa Goodman made a good argument, I think. Do you remember what she said? She's like, yeah, we should make the sports team billionaire pay for their own police protection. We shouldn't have to cover that for them. And I think you voted against those. And I wonder, like, why is Lisa Goodman wrong?
No, I don't think she's wrong. I think that that one was a little bit of a gray area for me because you do get it into the why should taxpayers be paying for corporations' private security? I think that's a valid argument. The place where I was coming from is we are receiving so much outreach and calls to say that we are so short-staffed, that we just don't have enough officers. And I am having a hard time with the dissonance of hearing that we are so understaffed that we don't have enough officers to do the basics of policing. And we have enough officers to do completely voluntary overtime, no big deal. Like, those two things don't feel like they're internally consistent.
Right.
And I just think that with our staffing where it is right now, and we just really need to fundamentally look at how we're approaching public safety before we kind of willy-nilly go, oh, this neighborhood or that organization or this corporation, we got some spare capacity. They can buy it. It's really good for it's very fiscally responsible. But the argument that I made during committee is, do we have the same program for filling in potholes? Do we have the same program for garbage collection? Do we have the same program for any other city service that a nonprofit that was established 2 months ago can pool some resources from unknown funders to get special treatment from the city? I don't think we have that program for potholes. I don't think we have that program for garbage collection. I don't think we have that program for snow plowing. And in the crisis of policing that I think that we are actively living through, we should have a little bit more intentionality behind how we're using our resources.
What do you think about this rent control work group? Do you think that's the right way to have to start developing this policy? One thing that I've been thinking about recently on this topic is maybe we should have had like an interim ordinance, because housing policy takes a long time historically in Minneapolis to like come to fruition. Maybe we should have had a very basic thing ready to go on the ballot this year and give some space for this longer policy development process. But what do you think about having a work group make recommendations at the end of this year and then coming back next year, having the council set the language for the ballot in 23?
I like to contrast housing policy with public safety as like two very complex and challenging issues. And I think about it in terms of the policy and the politics. The politics of policing is so hairy, right? I don't want carjacking. I don't want catalytic converter theft. I want everyone to be able to walk in their neighborhood at any time of the evening and not feel like their safety is in jeopardy. That's the outcome that I want. And the way that I think that we can get there is by having more responses for public safety, having police have a much more focused mission, having alternative responses for, your garage gets broken into, your bike gets stolen. Whoever stole it is long gone and you just need a report for your insurance purposes. For me, this is like a very straightforward kind of analytical process for me. And I have an engineering background, so my engineer brain just goes, okay, we have this many calls for service per year. They are distributed across these different categories, and they're called problem nature codes, PNCs. One of them is EDP, emotionally disturbed person. We get this many EDP calls. They happen at this time of day and this side of town. Here goes how many staff we need for mental health. And then here goes, the hard part is the line that you draw when it's like, actually, this might be a pretty risky situation. We may want some police support in this instance. Figuring that line out is the complexity, but figuring out, like, here goes the categories of calls that people make to 911, and staffing accordingly feels like a very straightforward policy solution to that. But the politics of it are very fraught. And I think housing policy is inverse of that. You ask anybody, should, housing be affordable? Yes. Is housing a human right? Yes. Do we want to have, safe and stable housing for everyone? Yes. How do we get there? And then the financing complexity, the build complexity of, working through the zoning specifics and the building code specifics, it's very complex. And the way that some of these projects come together are very complex, and the financing and various interests are complex. But the actual politics of it is we want affordable housing for everyone. And so that complexity, there's kind of like, there's like a good faith interpretation of a work group, and then there's like a cynical interpretation of the work group. And the good faith version of the work group is, this is a really complex situation. It would be really helpful to center this around the renter's experience and have an understanding of landlords, an understanding of building developers, an understanding of the stakeholders that provide the financing, whether that financing is from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or a private bank. It would be really helpful to have all of that knowledge, wisdom, and perspective together at the table to come up with a really robust policy. That is one interpretation of the work group, and that is what the work group is, I think, sincerely trying to strike that balance. But in a cynical interpretation of any work group, whether it's on housing policy or any other topic, is let's get as many people at the table as possible with as different a perspective as possible, so there'll never be consensus, and they'll spin their wheels and they'll never actually come forward with an actual actionable recommendation. That's where like your most cynical interpretation is. And whatever the aspiration is in terms of the hope, it's never going to achieve that. And whatever your worst fear is about the cynicism, it's probably not that either. But at the end of the day, I want the strongest rent stabilization policy that this body can get done. And I want it to be as fast as possible. And so one thing that I really hope that we can do is not throw all of our hopes, wishes, and dreams into the work group. Can we have maybe a parallel effort around a council-led or a staff-led initiative? Because we did just have a very robust study put together by Cura around rent stabilization policies that was fairly comprehensive and very geographically specific to Minneapolis's current housing market. I think that we have enough knowledge to come forward with a really strong policy. And I would hate to lose the opportunity to bring that policy forward to voters this year. I'd like to see something on the ballot this year. And so how we get to that is going to be figured out, I think, in the coming days and weeks. But I think that initiative could also live in parallel with the work group and at least have that as a potential path forward. But I think there's more to come there.
How do we balance potential unintended consequences? Because I'm somebody who, I do not want a policy that like kills the new housing market, because I think that's like, it's not enough that we build new housing, but it's certainly better that we do than if we don't. And also, like if you exempt new construction, and it only applies to older housing, maybe that's an incentive to tear some of that housing down. So there's that like unintended consequence. And I think there was an article recently about how there was a study in St. Paul about how market values across the city had been harmed by their policy. And I'm thinking, and the rent control advocates there were like, no, it's too early. That's not valid. But I'm thinking, well, isn't that kind of the point? There's a little bit of a tension there. We shouldn't want housing values to be skyrocketing. Maybe it's okay that like the sale price of a single family home only went up 5% and not 15%.
Yeah, and I think that is the exact intention of the work group, is to be able to do an analysis that has all those multiple perspectives, because there's going to be blind spots from any stakeholder. The renter's perspective is going to not necessarily have a comprehensive understanding of how banks, finance and underwrite large construction projects. A large builder is probably fairly disconnected from the lived reality of being a renter, working at minimum wage, having to carry multiple jobs and have roommates just to barely squeak by month to month. And so the spirit of the work group is to be able to bring a diversity of perspectives so that we can at least have some analysis and anticipation of some of those unintended consequences, and keep the policy focused on the intended consequence, which is preventing displacement. But like I said, I think that we could do something in parallel with a lot of the analysis that's already been completed with the Cura study.
So we've got a new strong mayor system. Is that hampering the legislative process? Are we far enough into this term to understand how that's impacted the legislative work of the council?
I think you did a very beautiful illustration of the clerk's presentation around that approach.
Yeah, he does his own graphic design, I think.
Yeah, like instantly more complex. Throw a pyramid on there. But
is it that bad? It's as bad as the tweet?
No, there is some clarity that is starting to get shaped. There's some formality that's starting to get shaped. Being a new council member, it's like I don't actually have I actually worked on an ordinance as a contractor, and that's kind of my basis of understanding the legislative process. But when you're working at the staff level, you are coming in after the council action has already been done. The votes have been had, the majority was settled, and now we are moving forward with the direction of the body that they gave to staff. Getting on council and getting upstream of that legislative process has been a very big learning opportunity, and that would be before mixing it up with executive mayor legislative council. And so there's kind of I like to think in things in spectrums. That's just how my brain processes complexity. On one end of the spectrum, you may have one council member who's got a very specific policy that they want to pursue, and they are introducing the concept to the institution. And they're bringing it forward because of a direct story that they heard on the campaign trail from one of their constituents, or maybe it's coming from some personal experience and background, but they want to use this opportunity as a policymaker to bring forward a new initiative. That's one flavor of the legislative process. Another flavor of the legislative process is staff has been working on an entire body of work. Maybe that was approved via a council action from a term or even 2 terms ago, and there might be some extra little tweak to an ordinance that needs to happen that staff has already prepared some language around, and they're just looking for an author to bring it forward so that the body can take action on it. That's kind of like the 2 extremes of something that's completely new and never been explored before by the institution, all the way through to the institution is actually leading the work, and they need a council member's, name and vote, and maybe whipping votes and support to champion that ordinance through. And I would say the version where staff has already been working on something, it's either been approved via previous council action or approved via, department leadership. That feels pretty similar right now. It's the other work that has the bigger change. Under the previous government structure, a council member could just go, I have an idea. Let me send an email to somebody at the staff level that I know that works on this in this area. And that could actually get the ball rolling for some legislation. What we're formalizing right now is council has kind of 3 tiers of how they can interact with staff. One tier is an individual member, might just have a question. They just need to talk to a subject matter expert and get some clarification, get some data. They can email the department head, and the department head will kind of direct that to the right person to get you your answer. And if it's something that's, just a few hours to just go digging in and finding a file somewhere and sharing it and passing it along, a single council member can just make that request, no big deal. If it requires more than that level of effort, if it requires some research or some direct action, we have to actually move as a body. So we actually have to bring forward, either in committee or full council, the body has to take a vote. Is it appropriate to pursue this staff direction, to do this referral to staff, to do some research? So that's kind of the big change, I would say. The institution still really runs on relationships. And, there's some growing pains, if you will, in terms of this new structure. It used to be that a constituent the plows went by right after they paid for a snow shoveling service to clear out the sidewalk path to the street. They're elderly and they don't have the mobility to just go clear that out. Can you send a crew out to clear that out for me? That was a request that you used to be able to just like know the person in Public Works to get in touch with and just say, hey, can you get around to doing that? Now they really want you to formally go through the department head so that they can, prioritize the request accordingly. And so that's kind of been a growing pain. I suspect that that's going to have to evolve because I can't imagine a city of this size having to have every single request channeling through one person via email forward via 13 people on council. That seems like maybe not the best workflow, but I think that's kind of the direction that the institution is moving to, is kind of formalizing these types of requests so you don't have 13 random people with random requests putting staff, completely shaking up staff's work schedules as they have to reprioritize. Because as somebody who worked at the staff level in City Hall, it's pretty arresting to get an email from a council member. We think of ourselves as, we're just people, it's just a friendly email. But just the simple fact that you see from and it's a council member can get your cackles up a little bit. Oh, God, what did I do?
Probably depends who it is. If Elliott Payne is emailing me, I'm like, oh, look, it's Elliott Payne emailing me. If Lisa Goodman has emailed me, I'm like, what did I do? What's going on?
Hopefully I can establish that kind of reputation. Time will tell.
Yeah, you've got the kind of personality that makes people happy to receive an email from you.
Yeah, we'll see.
Are you finding yourself explaining to constituents at all, like, our government structure works a little differently now? Are you shielding constituents from that reality?
I try to introduce it when it's relevant. It's not always relevant, especially if a lot of constituent calls are like, they're just happy to get in touch with a council member. Like, my favorite thing is actually like being the person that picks up the phone instead of somebody in my office. And because they're always like, oh, I didn't expect you would actually pick up the phone. And, a lot of those conversations are feedback or requests. No matter what the request is, I'm not going to be the one that physically executes the request. So oftentimes the answer is like, thank you. I will get in touch with the right person and I will follow up with you on what the next steps are. Right. They don't need to necessarily understand all of the machinery behind that. That's in some instances. In other instances, especially like police is such a sensitive issue right now. Sometimes you just have to ground people in, that is actually not within my purview as a council member. That is 100% within the purview of the mayor. And I will definitely share that feedback with the mayor. You know what I mean? So when it's appropriate, I try to raise that. But I don't try to, not everybody is paying attention to blogs about council meetings and live Twitter feeds of council meetings. A lot of people don't care about those details, so I try to not overwhelm them with it.
Don't care at all about Wedge Live. It's true.
I do. I care about Wedge Live.
Thank you. I'm going to clip that, and that's going in the commercial reel. Here we are. I promised. You know what? I promised you it would be 30-ish minutes, and we're at 55 minutes. So thank you.
That's why I rescheduled our time.
Thank you for not bailing me on the middle. You promised me it would be 30 minutes. I think we're done. Real quick, do you have any recommendations for things that will brighten someone's day? An experience, a book, a TV show? What are you enjoying lately?
I'm more of a video game person when I'm in my free time and trying to just kind of not be that tuned in.
What platform? PC?
My wife scored a PS5 on launch day.
Oh. I got an Xbox.
And she is right now playing Elden Ring downstairs.
Oh, can you? So is she a fan of that genre of games, or was it a new? Because I've heard that Elden Ring is kind of a learning curve if you're not used to that style of game.
Dead new to it. Has never played a Soulsborne game in her entire life. The little bit that she's seen of it, she's just like, that's not for me. But there's so much hype around Elden Ring that she decided to jump in. I started Dark Souls, and then I realized I'm not really that hardcore of a gamer. I got too frustrated with it. So I kind of like built my character out, ran around, got killed enough to be like, I'll come back to this. I don't exactly have time to invest the time. My wife is, she was like, she hated it, but this is her entire like relationship with video games. She starts it, is frustrated by how hard it is, but then has to take vengeance on how hard it is. And then it sucks her in. And that's where she's at right now. So I would recommend that if you're a video game player.
I might try it. I've been worried because I am also not familiar with the genre, and I've read some reviews that say if you like this kind of thing, it's for you. Maybe if you haven't done it before, it might be painful.
It might be the cilantro of video games, if you know that reference.
I don't understand.
Some people are genetically predisposed to taste like cilantro tastes like soap. It's like a horrifying flavor profile for them, and for other people, it's the most refreshing thing ever. You might just it might be like soap in your mouth. I don't know. You'll have to figure it out yourself.
Okay. Council member Elliott Payne, representing Ward 1, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, really happy to be here. Like I said, I'm a fan of Wedge Live. I think you do great work.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
I'm
did you get any advertisers yet? What's your Raycon code?
Oh yeah, so we're gonna have a break in this episode. Today's advertiser is dispatchmsp.com. And hopefully you've already heard that ad, which I will insert into the episode earlier. But thank you, Elliott Payne, for remembering we have an advertiser. Everyone check out dispatchmsp.com. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.